Welcome to Stories After Midnight. Today we're going to be reading a story called A Deal with the Devil. This is written by Jarrett and is a viewer submitted story, but he's becoming more of a regular now, so I think we'll have to drop that soon enough. But I hope you enjoy this story. If you do, let me know in the comments below or wherever you can. Let's get started. On the outskirts of the Texas prairie sat a trailer, dingy, dilapidated, on its last legs. Broken shards of beer bottles and crack pipes littered the dead grass by the front door. A rusted-out husk of a car planted itself in the yard. If one could call a sun-baked bowl a yard. The entire compound backed up to a rocky cliff, like nature's version of a cul-de-sac. Walking up to the front door would offend the nostrils with a pungent mixture of booze and cat piss. The inside looked like it had been trashed by burglars on crystal meth. Cheap broken tile made the perfect breeding ground for roaches and mice. Stepping into the living room was like crossing a minefield of droppings. The really big roaches came out at night. Their brown bodies infested the broken fridge and half-eaten pizza boxes whose contents had long since turned a fuzzy emerald green. Eli sat on the torn couch, white moonlight casting through parted blinds. The overhead bulb flickered indecisively as he blotted a sugar cube into a vial of liquid LSD. He examined the white crystalline cube for a moment before plopping it onto his tongue and allowing it to dissolve. Leaning back, he exhaled and took a whiff of his armpit. Like any patchouli-wearing hippie, he rarely bathed. After 20 minutes of listening to his companion's snore, he felt it start to kick in. The room began to morph, lines began to blur. He focused on the doorknob and it began to churn and move. Rising to his feet, he felt the individual grout lines of the tile, each grain of dust caked into every skin pore. He held his hand up to his face. The color shifted. What began as white flesh morphed into a deep red. It traveled up his arm, through his veins, and into the tips of his fingers. He opened his mouth and drawled a throaty, "Man." He was so baked right now, totally fried. Tripped out to the nines. The torn wallpaper began to move in circular patterns like 100 merry-go-rounds all at once. He reached out and touched the flowers that were floating in the air all around him. He heard the news on TV. Some deep-voiced anchor turned to look and was greeted with a black screen. A laugh burst forth. He glanced down and saw Rain, the scrawny young woman in the recliner, stir but not awaken. She wouldn't for a while. She dropped so much that he'd had to slow her down. That trip had been bad, a real rough one to handle. She'd been paranoid and anxious as all hell, talking about cops looking at her through the walls. They had their guns drawn and were gonna pop her. Freaking pop her, man. Then she swore she saw a man hanging around outside. Eli hadn't seen anyone, but had grabbed the shotgun from the bedroom just in case she wasn't bugging out. Minutes turned to hours. As he lost himself in his psychedelic excursion, he heard a knock. No, not a knock, a pounding. He jumped. The door bulged against its hinges as the lambasting continued. "Who's there?" It came out as a giggle. It was all he could think of. No one ever traveled out here. They were in the middle of nowhere. It had to be in his head, man. Totally hallucination. Another booming set of knocks. Eli felt his heart awaken from its drug-induced hibernation. The relaxation was gone, replaced by fear. This wasn't the effect of LSD. This was real. Frantic, he strolled over to Jeb. The man sprawled out in the hallway and shook him. The passed-out lump moaned into the floor and a roach crawled out of his mob of blonde hair. "Get up, Jeb. We got company." Through his drug-addled vision, he saw Jeb's pock-marked face smile at him through the back of his own head. Eli wiped a palm over his face, shook himself free of the disorienting vision, and wobbled back into the living room. He snatched the shotgun from its leaning perch against the couch. 3 more knocks. "You want to die, boy?" Eli shouted. More knocks. "I got a gun here and I'll fill you up with it if you don't get out of here." More knocks. And that did it. With a guttural howl, he charged through the door and smashed through it. The hinges cried out as the door swung violently. An impeccably dressed man in an exquisitely tailored black suit careened back, his arms flailing wildly. Eli didn't hesitate. He aimed center mass and fired. The buckshot exploded from the barrel and spread out in a wide trajectory. The man emanated no sound as the pellets mangled his flesh in a wet red spray. He stumbled back but remained upright. Eli rubbed the fog from his eyes and stared in bewilderment. The hallucinations carried on, and he couldn't be sure what was a figment of his imagination and what was real. "Is that how you treat all your guests?" the man asked, flicking shotgun pellets out of his torn suit with no more care than a housewife cleaning off a dinner table. "What in the... You're wondering how I'm still standing, no? How I'm not dead? Well, allow me to answer your question with one of my own. Would you like to find out for yourself?" "Find out? What you talking about?" A tremor shot through Eli as the world continued to dance around him. He couldn't wrap his mind around any of this. The man looked at him and gave him a curt smile. His swept-back black hair and clean-shaven face glistened in the overhead moonlight. A coyote howled in the distance. "May I come in?" he asked, gesturing to the trailer door. "Why?" "You know, it's rude not to invite a guest indoors." The smile tilted upwards, displaying subtle menace. Eli warily stepped back through the doorway and the man followed. "Thank you." The man leaned against the kitchen counter while Eli threw himself back down into the couch. The gunshot had evidently not awoken either Jeb or Rain, and he hadn't heard moonglow in the back bedroom. Was this the man Rain had seen while tripping out earlier? The thought crossed Eli's mind, so he asked it. "My girl saw you hanging out around earlier," he accused, the words having no edge on them. Yeah, I know. She is more perceptive than you give her credit for. She is much more than just a hot little body, as you crudely put it. What an imbecile you are." The man began rummaging through the fridge and scoffed, looking like a Picasso that had found its way into a dumpster. "Huh? Nothing. I'm just surprised you decided to live in such a... how shall I say it?" He ran his finger along a dusty cabinet. "Landfill. But that's of no concern to me. What I am concerned about is you, Eli. You." He pointed. "Me? What you talking about?" "Talking about everything, Eli. Everything. You're the key to the future." "The key? What key?" Eli squeezed his eyes shut as the room spun. The man waited until Eli's senses realigned before continuing. "Let me pose a question." "Shoot," he said. The man chuckled. "The pun is not lost on me. Bravo." He clapped. Eli craned his head in confusion. He was not clever, and whatever quips he did make were unintentional. "Never mind that. I want you to know something about you, Eli. Something important. What do you want?" What do I want?" "I do believe that is what I asked. I only need but a few things. Women, hooch, drugs. That's about all, I guess." Eli smiled. The man rolled his eyes. "Beyond that." "What are you getting at?" The man sighed. He had had enough of the banter. "How would you like to be able to take a gunshot in the chest?" "You mean like not get hurt?" "Think bigger." I don't." The man slammed his palms down impatiently on the counter and glowered at him. "If I could offer you immortality right now, would you take it?" he asked. A cold sweat broke out on Eli's brow. "Come on now. Now you're making stuff up." There was a hitch in Eli's nervous chuckle. "Do I amuse you?" The man gave him a hard look. Eli's lips straightened into a line and he shook his head, remembering how the man had taken that shotgun blast. "Good. Maybe I need to further convince you of my abilities. Perhaps that would speed things up." The man opened a cabinet drawer and slid out a carving knife, rolling up his sleeve in the process. Without a moment's hesitation, he held the knife to the underside of his wrist and slit. Blood immediately began gushing from the cut. He switched hands and repeated the process with his other wrist. With both wrists pulsating streams of crimson, he held the knife up to his throat and slashed at it. A massive gash sprayed from the wound. He tilted his head back, revealing his visible spinal cord. Eli watched in horror. The blood looked like it was traveling right towards him. He backed away. How was he still standing? It was impossible. He should be dead. "Look," the man said, holding up both wrists. Miraculously, all 3 wounds sealed up simultaneously. The skin pulled itself back together. The bleeding ceased. Eli stared at the man, stunned. What? How'd you do that? He pointed, his finger trembling like an alcoholic going cold turkey. I'm not what you would call a normal man, Eli. I can tell you you're no normal man either. He walked out from behind the counter into the living room and squatted down in front of the couch. He held out his wrist to Eli. Feel. Eli felt. Nothing. No hint of scarring. You magic or something? The man chuckled. In a manner of sorts, I suppose. I can bestow you with this same power as well if you so desire. Think about it. A god walking amongst mere mortals. Yes, I'll do whatever you want. Eli slid off the couch and got down on his knees as if in prayer. I figured that. Nothing is ever really free now, is it? No, especially not for something this momentous. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and fished a hand inside. He pulled out an old book. Its cover was bound in thick black leather. It held no title on the cover or spine. Let me see that. Eli reached out to touch it. The man pulled it back. Now, Eli, the man cooed. Don't get grabby. Eli wrenched his hand back like it had been smacked. The man began flipping through torn, dog-eared pages until he found what he was looking for. He turned the book around and held it before Eli. Immortality was written in an ornate font. Small text ran below it, an ancient illustration on the opposite page, showing a man standing over piles of the dead. Below the illustration was a set of blank boxes. I must set some ground rules. First, I will give you a task you must complete by tomorrow. What do you want me to do? He asked. The man looked down at the floor and smiled. A life for a life. I can't bestow you with immortality and not ask for something in return. In order to take, you must give back. Give back? A life. You mean you must kill someone. Murder them in cold blood if you prefer. Who? Anyone. I do not care. A soldier, a sex worker, a senator, whomever you want. Although an infant in a crib may be easiest. I never killed no one before. He held up a finger and tutted. You killed me just now, remember? Blasted me to another galaxy. Technically speaking, I should be dead. In fact, he turned, staring at Rain and Jeb. I'm surprised your shotgun didn't awaken them. They must be gone right now, lost in the trip, I suppose, but it's no matter. You've killed before, a mere minute or two ago. Think about how easy it'll be the second time. Eli pondered this. Maybe he was right. It wouldn't be so bad, and the payoff, it was worth the risk. I'll do it. His voice quavered, but he nodded. His confidence was just for show. Deep down, he was terrified of the prospect. Allow me to add in a small caveat. A wrinkle, if you will. If you wish, I can add your 3 group members into the deal. Eli nodded adamantly. I'll need help, he said, not realizing that the man should not know how many were in the trailer. The man looked understanding. Of course you will. That's to be expected. Now, of course, I will need to up the bounty if I am to bestow 4 people with longevity that has no expiration. What do you mean? 4 people. You must kill 4 others. Okay, I'll do it. We'll do it, but we need more time. How does another day sound? He asked. Eli nodded emphatically. Excellent. Just sign here. He held out the page. I don't have a pen. You don't use a pen when you make a deal with me. Hold out your pointer finger. Eli did as instructed. With a sharp stabbing motion, the man pierced Eli's finger pad with his fingernail. A small drop of blood bubbled on the surface. Press your finger in one of the boxes. Eli did. A wave of burning fire shot through his finger, up his arm and his shoulder. Eli cried out in agony as the flesh burned and smoked up the page. Finally, he pulled back. His fingerprint was a smoldering reddish-black stain on the page. Damn, that hurt. Your clock starts now. If you don't complete your task in the allotted time, I will pay you another visit. The sheer evil in the grin sent a shockwave through Eli's bowels. He was too afraid to ask what that visit would entail, but was sure he could put the pieces together. The man stood up and held up Jeb's limp arm, who snored and gurgled saliva, but otherwise remained undisturbed. The man pressed Jeb's finger into the book. Next was Rain. She stirred and her eyes half opened, like a flower in the thralls of springtime. Her finger was pressed into the book. The man stepped over Jeb and walked down the hall to where Moonglow was asleep in the back bedroom. After a moment, he re-entered the living room. He held out the page. Eli's hands trembled as the man showed the 4 sets of fingerprints of the book. He told himself it was the only way this could be done. He couldn't kill by himself. He'd need help. Maybe they'd understand if they knew the reward. But deep down, a sick feeling twisted his soul, or what was left of it. He was betraying them, damning them. The man turned to leave and then stopped. Oh, I almost forgot. He reopened his suit jacket and slid the book inside. He felt around, pulled out a bundle of items, and dropped them on the floor. For your convenience. With that, the man vanished in a trail of wispy black smoke. Eli coughed and waved his hands to disperse it. When it cleared, he stared at the pile that laid in front of him. He crouched down to examine it, some kind of towel. He unfolded it and held it before him. No, not a towel. A cape. No, this was something else. It was a cloak, red and ornately decorated with black seamwork running down the entire length. Long and wide, stretching from well over his head with a foot or two left dragging on the floor. Why would he leave this? What was the point? A silly cloak? It was useless. Then he heard something plop on the floor. He threw the cloak on the couch and licked his lips. A dagger. Red jewels decorated the hilt and ran up the length of the blade. He picked it up and hefted it. Heavy. Clunky even. The handle was much too heavy for the blade. It felt off balance in his hand as he swung it around in the air. Why leave it for him? He turned back to the cloak. His brain stopped working as he stared at an empty couch. No, wait, it was right there. He had only thrown it a second ago. Did it disappear? Was he still hallucinating? Maybe this whole thing was just a wacky LSD trip. Yeah, that's what it was. Just a bad trip. He needed sleep. He threw himself back down on the couch. It felt off. Something red caught his eye. The cloak. But wait. Where was the other side of it? He stood and peeled it back, and only one side was red. The other side was invisible. An invisibility cloak. No, impossible. This kind of thing only existed in fantasy. Yet as he draped the heavy fabric over his arm and stared down at a roach crawling on the floor, he could not deny it. His arm was invisible. He pulled the cloak lower and draped it over his leg. He jostled to a mirror and stared, dumbfounded. Only half of him was visible. Pulled it over his entire body. The wall behind him stared back. Still in denial, he shrugged it off, fluffed it, and draped it over the still sleeping Rain. Her ratty blonde hair, her white tank top, her jean shorts, her pink flip-flops, all gone, vanished into thin air. The recliner was the only thing visible. Yanked the cloak off. Her eyes opened and locked onto him. Only then did he realize the immense power he held. He began to laugh. A day later. We gonna do this or what? The unclean girl asked as she bounced up and down in the booth seat, her hands slapping the table with hyper tenacity. Patrons turned their heads to stare at the motley assortment nestled in the corner booth. The clientele consisted of middle and working class types, so a ragtag bunch of grimy hippies stood out like a sore thumb. Jeanette, the waitress, moaned and griped to her coworkers about the noxious body odor emanating from the table. Worse, she just knew they were going to stiff her on the tip. It was the height of the breakfast rush and there wasn't a table to spare. Couldn't they just leave? Of course they didn't. They had sat there for the better part of an hour. 2 men, 1 woman, scarfed down plates of pancakes and eggs and bacon and waffles. She walked back over with a pot of coffee in one hand and the checkbook in the other. Their plates were either empty or they nudged in that direction. They were huddled in the midst of conversation. She sensed that it was meant to be hushed, but the girl kept hollering instead of whispering. She wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. It was probably the butter knife. With this thought making her crack a thin smile, Jeanette cleared her throat. Immediately the conversation ceased. 3 sets of eyes shot up at her like she'd walked into the Oval Office during Watergate. It made her heart quiver for a moment. She pressed the checkbook against her chest to tame the murmur and regain her composure. When it came, she said, "Anything else I can do for you?" She paused, looking the group up and down. "Fine folks?" The final 2 words were laced with sarcasm, in a way that told them exactly what she thought of them while giving her plausible deniability, should they squawk or complain to management. Immediately, the tension eased. "Nah, that's all right, sweetheart. Just slide up." "Nah, that's all right, sweetheart. Just slide that on over," the leader of the group said, snapping for the check. That must have been Eli. He licked his lips. Why, in fact, you can slide more than just that over." Eli broke out into a laugh, and the posse followed his lead. His open mouth displayed rows of gaps where teeth should have been. What little teeth were there were stained a sickly, yellowish brown. They looked like rotting corn kernels. "My goodness, baby, you really wasting yourself working at this joint." He was a real heartthrob. Oh yeah, a real ladies' man with his greasy, shoulder-length black hair, pock-marked skin, and unkempt stubble. He could make any woman's knees melt. Yeah, right. She'd been called a sweetheart by some real pigs in her day, but this guy might have just taken the cake for the biggest creep to ever hit on her. "Sorry, honey," she said in her homely southern accent while holding up her ring finger. "I'm taken." The incandescence gleamed off the diamond centered in the wedding ring as she slid the check on the table. Eli's smile abruptly vanished like a rabbit in a magician's hat. It was replaced by a strange, off-putting stare, his eyes fixated on hers. They remained unblinking, as if he'd never heard the word no before. A gut-clenching thought struck her. Maybe he didn't care what she said. This was a man who took what he wanted. "Nah, I think you should come over here, darling. Yeah, right here." He rotated in the booth and propped his left foot up on the seat. He parted his legs and patted his thighs, looked down, then back up at her. His upper lip twitched. He waited for her to speak. She tried, but her first attempt fell on its face. The second time was no better. She looked away and heard that awful voice coo. "Don't be shy." "Why are you standing there, huh? He asking you, Shum?" The other guy chirped up. His sandy blonde hair swept down to his eyebrows. The waitress eyed him. Still a pig, but at least he owned a hairbrush. The girl who sat next to him looked worried. She'd finally clued in that they were causing a commotion. She frantically grabbed the man's arm, whispering, "Jeb, shut up." He looked at her like she'd stepped way out of line and wrenched his arm free from her grasp. "Knock it off, the both of you," Eli commanded, his eyes still feasting on the waitress. "I ain't gonna ask you nicely again, sweetheart," he said. Something changed in his demeanor. His body tensed. "Come on, Eli. I don't..." "Shut the hell up, Rain." The shout cut through the restaurant. It was so sudden in its delivery and so intense in its volume that all conversation in the dining room ceased. A plate clattered against another. Everyone stared. A family of 4 began to rise from their seats, the mother clutching her children to her sides like they were in immediate danger. The little overhead bell chimed as they pushed past the front doors and onto the sidewalk. The waitress's heart skipped a beat as she stared at Eli, his eyes shooting daggers into the girl seated across from him. Rain stiffened, her lips quavering as they sputtered a faltering reply. "I'm sorry, shut the hell up, goddamn you!" He slammed his fists into the table like an ape, causing plates to rattle and napkins to flutter to the floor. He was utterly capricious. The waitress backed away a step. "Sir, if you keep yelling like that, you're going to have to leave." All right, he said, throwing his hands up. "I'm cool. I guess I left my manners at the door." What was Moonglow doing? Eli thought as he stood up from the booth without paying. He felt the waitress tug at his sleeve, but he jerked free and kept moving. "Get your filthy hands off of me," he shouted, and people began rising from their seats. Angry men shouted, women's hands flew to their mouths. This was a catastrophe. Moonglow had one job, kill the waitress, and she couldn't even do that. What a useless sack of... Moonglow sprinted to the front door of the diner, waving her arm like a beacon call, the other holding the red cloak. The 3 hippies pushed out of the diner and into the overcast morning. Eli got in Moonglow's face. "You had one job, you done mother..." Wait, no, I did something. Something good. What? What did you do besides mess everything up? He shouted. She flinched, looked away, then returned his glare with one of her own. A sinister grin spread across her lips as she wiggled the dagger in front of his face. I used this. To do what? You didn't follow the plan. He pulled at her arm and the four began walking in tandem. You still want to cut her, right? I gotta wait for us to do it. How? Jeb called from behind. I used to slice up her tire, and well, I was thinking that maybe we wait, hang around till she gets off, then offer her a ride. She'll have to take it, right? Her forehead wrinkled in a hopeful expression. She wanted Eli to validate her. Yeah, maybe, he responded. But why did you stray from the plan? You were supposed to hide out in the back with the cloak and stab her then run. You was too busy hitting on her, she hissed, parting the brown hair from her eyes. Eli abruptly stopped. He grabbed the skinny girl's bony arms and shook her like a mother shaking a crying newborn. Don't you question what I do, any of you. Got that? They all looked sullen, but nodded in agreement. After all, they hadn't seen nor spoken to the man last night like Eli had. When they had all awakened and Eli had told them about the interaction and the deal, he'd been laughed at. That was until he showed them the cloak that had gotten them on board real quick. Hold on, Rain piped up. The three looked at her. What? We need a ride to offer her. Eli pondered this for a moment, and yeah, she was right. Slowly, methodically, a plan began to form. Later that night, Moonglow sat in the driver's seat of the sedan with the headlights off. The rain drummed a pitter-patter rhythm on the windshield and windows. Her right hand drifted down and caressed the handle of the dagger that jutted out from between the pillowy seat cushion and center console. They had stolen this car and hot-wired it earlier in the day. It had been idling ever since, and the gas gauge was on its last leg. She shifted in the leather bucket seat, her body sore and sweaty from the hours of sitting. The worst part was peeing in the empty water bottle. She spotted movement in the side view mirror. The waitress exited the back of the diner, her head huddled in her rubber raincoat to fend off the storm. Perfect. She opened the passenger side door. The interior light fluttered to life, illuminating the sagging, flat tire. She saw the woman freeze. Her hands flew to the sides of her head. Angry stomping ensued. Wet puddles flew up her legs as she threw a bona fide temper tantrum. Moonglow supposed she might do the same were circumstances reversed. She flipped on the headlights as the woman slammed her car door shut and sagged against it. The rain inundated her in a relentless torrent. Moonglow pulled forward and stopped parallel to the woman, scooting her thigh to the right to hide the dagger. She rolled down the driver's side window. Hey, need a lift? She asked. She'd stolen a nice outfit from a department store earlier in the day and had touched up her makeup. A purple floral blouse, striped bell-bottoms, and a dainty little flower in her hair. She cleaned up nicely and looked like any other college student. This, coupled with the fact that it was another woman driving and not a man, meant the waitress would have no reason to be suspicious. No, that's okay. The woman waved her off, but her eyes said otherwise. They were desperate for a roof and heater. She might as well have had her thumb in the air. You sure? I'm heading home from class and stopped for a bite when I realized you were all closed up. That's when I noticed you stranded. Moonglow put on what she hoped was a caring smile. The woman looked at her flattened tire, then back up. Will you head up to Ratcliffe? The neighborhood? Moonglow asked. She had taken a while to guess. The woman nodded. Yeah, it's not too far. She winced, and Moonglow smiled. No problem. Hop on in. Oh, thank you so much. Let me grab my bag. She fumbled with her keys, unlocked the door, and flung her bag over her shoulder. She hurried over and got into the passenger side. Settling in, she secured her lap belt and Moonglow got rolling. Do it now, she thought, but didn't. She pulled out of the parking lot and signaled right. I'm Jeanette, the woman said. She held out her hand and Moonglow gave her a dead fish handshake. She turned right. Fleeting pools of yellow streetlight reflected off the slick, rain-drenched pavement. Moonglow. Moonglow? That's your real name? Kind of funny. Moonglow shook her head. No, not my real name. It's just what I go by. Oh yeah? You're one of those hippies, huh? A free spirit type, yeah? Moonglow nodded and bit her lower lip. I guess you could call me that. So if Moonglow isn't your real name, what is? I don't go by that name anymore. She gave an awkward smile and a half laugh that felt forced to both of them. But what's your real name? Moonglow fidgeted in her seat. Why are you so curious? Moonglow asked. Jeanette shrugged. I don't know. I'm just nosy, I guess. Now, come on, tell me. I'm dying to know. She blurted the first name that came to mind. Marilyn. Oh, I guess that makes sense. Kinda Marilyn Moonglow? Yeah, I can buy that. But it's funny, you don't look like a Marilyn. Jeanette said. She sniffed the air. You smell that? She asked. Moonglow blushed. She knew it was her urine. She'd missed the bottle more than once. Smell what? She turned onto the freeway. Jeanette held up a hand. Oh, no, you don't turn on the freeway. You'll have to take the first off-ramp. Oh, yeah, right. You sure you know where Ratcliffe is? It's in the opposite direction. Moonglow felt her cheeks flush. Of course. Sorry. Long night. Her leg pressed against the dagger. Its jewel-encrusted handle jabbed into her thigh. It beckoned to her. How easy it would be to just lift it and stab. But could she? What if she missed? What then? You hear me? The voice snapped her back to reality. Sorry, what? Take this exit. Oh, right. She veered the car right, cut across several lanes, and took the descending ramp. The rain intensified its downpour. The wipers flickered back and forth at maximum speed. God, what is that? Jeanette's hand waved in front of her nose, a mask of revulsion spreading about her features. Her forehead scrunched and her nostrils flared. I don't know. Well, it's putrid. Oh, if it wasn't raining, I'd roll down a window. The two drove in an uncomfortable silence, only broken by Jeanette's directions. After several minutes, this proved awkward, so as they hit a red light, she asked, Where do you go to school? Moonglow shook her head. I don't. What? I thought you said you were coming home from class. Jeanette turned in her seat, the suspicious nature of her stare causing Moonglow's heart to race. I mean, The stutter was sloppy, and the cracks in her story widened into a full-blown chasm. Jeanette shuddered, uncomfortably. Let me out of the next gas station. No, I'll take you. It's fine. I've taken up enough of your time already. Moonglow's hand drifted from the steering wheel to the dagger. She wrapped her fingers around it, clutched it, started to pull it out ever so slightly. She turned to face Jeanette. I'm sorry. I can't. What do you mean you can't? I'm supposed to. Let me out of your car. No, The light turned green. I want out. Worry flooded her eyes, her pitch rising slightly. Please let me out. Pull over, please. Just drop me off. Pull over. Right there is fine. Stop driving. I want out. Let me out. Let me out now. Help. Help. Someone please help me. She rolled down the windows and shouted hysterically into the rainy night. Moonglow felt herself freeze. She stared directly ahead. I'm being kidnapped. Help. Help. Someone help me. Suddenly a hand reached out from behind and gripped the dagger. She felt a brush against her leg as it was yanked out from its hiding spot. It was Jeb. He was lying down across the back seat with the cloak draped over him. He snatched a handful of Jeanette's hair, yanked her back in his seat, then raised the dagger and plunged it deep into Jeanette's collarbone with a sickening crunch. She didn't even have time to scream. Moonglow did. She shrieked as fresh warm droplets splattered her face in the windshield. He wasn't done. He continued to stab, the squelching of wet flesh consuming the cab. Again and again, the blood rose and fell in rapid succession. She pulled over and squeezed her eyes shut as Jeb continued his frenzy. Massacre. Butchery suited for an animal. No, even an animal deserved better. Eventually, the sound ceased, replaced by masculine panting. Wouldn't have had to do that if you would have kept your damn nerve, he shouted. She opened her eyes and gingerly looked to her right and screamed. Jeanette no longer had a face. In its place was a mosaic of torn, mangled red flesh with the consistency of rice pudding. The eyeballs had slid out of their sockets and down onto the seat, their nerve endings flowing out like roots from a tree. An exposed jawline showcased rows of teeth. Why'd you have to do that for? She wailed and shook her hands, free of pink bits of flesh. The urge to vomit overwhelmed her. A queasy feeling crept up her throat. Rolling down the window, she leaned her head out and puked, the stomach acid burning her mouth. "I told you why," he shouted. She wiped her mouth and leaned back in the car, the corners of her eyes damp. "She wasn't so bad, Jeb. You killed her." "Well, someone had to." He flashed a bloody grin. "Come on, we gotta dump this car." The same night. "Hey, where's Moonglow?" Eli asked as rain did metallic drum rolls on the trailer's roof. Jeb shrugged and shut the door behind him, his clothes thoroughly soaked with blood and rainwater. His blonde hair plastered to his scalp and forehead like paper mache. "Ditched us? The hell are you talking about?" "She got cold feet, Eli. Wouldn't kill a woman. I had to. Dumped the car in a ravine and threw a match in it," he said, tossing the cloak to Eli, who caught it deftly with both hands. "Where'd she run off to?" Jeb shrugged. "I don't know. Tried chasing her, but she jumped out of the driver's seat while the car was rolling and I had to scramble to keep the car from wrecking. Put it in park and sprinted after her, but I lost sight. Burned it and walked the rest of the way back here." Eli kicked the floor, flinging up a cloud of dust. "What do you want to do?" Jeb asked. Eli looked up at him. He grit his teeth and hissed, "I don't know, I gotta think." Miles away, a sobbing and very bloody Moonglow stumbled into a dimly lit police station. It was after hours, so the place was almost entirely void of people, except for a police officer at the reception desk. Feet propped up, hands clasped behind his head, watching a football game on a small portable TV. Catching her movement, his eyes darted up to her, the bored expression transforming to a countenance of unease. "Ma'am?" he began cautiously. Moonglow sagged against the counter and cried, "I saw someone get stabbed." His eyes sized her up and immediately noticed the bloodstains. Bolting out of his seat, he walked around the desk, the football game's commentary team providing background noise. "Are you hurt?" She didn't respond, just cried into the desk. He asked again. She shook her head but didn't look up. He leaned into the radio on his shoulder and began asking for paramedics and additional officers. Even if she wasn't injured, the blood worried him. He tried to calm her, but she began hyperventilating, her body swelling and quaking with each breath. Finally, after 10 long minutes, her breathing slowed and she was able to recount the night's events. A homicide detective sat her down and went over everything with a fine-tooth comb. Moonglow gave them everything. Names, locations, dates, time. In her infinite wisdom, she was booked and charged as an accomplice to murder. The next day. The clock struck 9 and Jeb was still wired from the previous 2 days. The trailer walls were now decorated with numerous fist-sized holes. His rage was unending, insidious, and violent after hearing the news report. One pregnant woman found dead in a burned-out car, with a police sketch flashing on the television of his face. "Damn her, she ratted us out," he kept on shouting. "What are we going to do about it?" Rain asked. "Bust into her cell, I think." Eli karate chopped the air. "No, we can't break into a police station. Besides, we don't even know where they're stashing her." "But if I use the..." Jeb protested. Eli jabbed a finger into his chest. "Everyone in the state knows what you look like, boy. Every single person. You gotta stay here, lay low for a while. Hell, you probably gotta leave. All of us do," he said. Rain's eyes widened. "Leave? And abandon her? Where are we gonna go?" she asked. Eli grabbed locks of hair on either side of his head and yanked. "Let me think, damn it." She approached him and placed her palm on his chest. "It'll be okay," she said. He batted her hand away, shaking his head like the CEO of a failing company. She snatched it back. "Eli, you gotta relax. We can get to her, even if she's locked up." "How? How are we gonna manage that?" he asked. Jeb held up the cloak and flashed a menacing grin. "Sneak in with this." He held up the dagger. "And slice her with this." Rain pushed away from Eli and slid in front of Jeb, suddenly panicked. "No, you ain't touching her. She's my older sister. If anything, we're breaking her out," she said. Jeb's grin vanished. "Someone who can be a witness against me? I don't think so." "I don't care about what you did. I ain't gonna help kill my only sister," she shouted back. He gritted his teeth, dropped the cloak and dagger on the floor and wrapped his hands around her neck. She coughed as she wrestled with his muscular forearms. Don't you go telling me. Hey. Eli tried to get in between the two, but Jeb was stronger. He kicked Eli in the groin, lifted up Rain's thrashing form, and slammed her against the wall. The thin wood shuddered and creaked as he slammed the back of her head again and again. Picture frames rattled, dust billowed off the wall. Roaches scattered in surprise. Eli writhed on the floor for a moment, groaning from the agony in between his legs. He heard Rain's air-choked gasps and knew he had to help her. With shaking knees, he rose to his feet. "You'd better get off of her," Eli shouted, but it came out a whine. God, that had been a hard kick in the jewels. Jeb was incensed. He not in the mood to talk things out. "Shut up," Jeb screamed, although whether it was directed towards Eli or Rain was unclear. Eli saw her face turn beet red as she gagged and retched, her suspended legs flailing in the air. He couldn't lose her, and if he had to choose, well then, choose he would. He bent over, his body still throbbing, retrieved the dagger from where Jeb had dropped it, and siphoned over. "You don't let go of her and I'll start cutting." Jeb didn't do so much as acknowledge him. That did it. The racing heart. He lunged for Jeb's ribs. He angled the tip of the blade in an upward trajectory. The glistening steel tore the fabric of Jeb's loose shirt. The rip caused his eyes to flicker over. Rain was losing focus and only saw a blur of motion, then the blessed release of her throat. She could breathe again and suck the air up like a Titanic passenger breaking the surface. Her heaving was greedy. Then she heard a howl of agony, looked up and saw the hilt of the dagger sticking out from Jeb's side. Massive pool of blood, spreading out across the shirt fabric. She hacked into her fist and rose on leaden knees. "Stab him! Kill him, Eli!" she howled. He obliged her by yanking out the dagger with a fleshy squelch, rose the glistening, dripping blade over his head, and plunging into the middle of Jeb's face. All was still. Fresh droplets coated Eli's face like an art canvas. He looked up at her, his breathing rapid. "We gotta go," he said, wiping the bloody dagger off on Jeb's mangled shirt. He took her by the hand and opened the front door of the trailer and froze in place. "Hello, Eli." A wide grin spread across the man's face, and Eli took a step back, bumping into Rain. "Who is that?" she asked. The man chortled. "Oh, I go by many names, dear." He let it hang in the air. "Such as?" she asked. He cracked his knuckles as he stepped into the trailer and shut the door behind him. "Lucifer will do." Rain's eyes widened. "You mean like the devil?" "Shut up," the man shouted. He thrusted a finger and suddenly Rain was flying backwards, slamming into the wall with a sickening thud. She stayed there, levitating. A trickle of blood crept from between her unconscious lips. "Rain!" He ran over to her, but the man shot out his leg and Eli tripped and tumbled over it. He slammed into the floor. "You failed in your task." Eli shook his head to clear the cobwebs. "What are you talking about? I still have some time, don't I?" "No, your time has expired. As will you." The man stared hard at him. "No, wait," Eli began, but was silenced with a raised palm. "I want to hear nothing from you. I mean, really. You can't even manage to kill anyone in 2 days. You really are an imbecile." The man spat at him. The glob of saliva landed in the middle of Eli's forehead. The sizzle of flesh filled the trailer. Eli howled and clutched his head as his skin burned. "I gave you a chance to be a god. Oh, God, and you squandered it. Flushed it down the toilet because you're a moron. I should have known better." Through tear-blurred vision, Eli begged. "No, please, you gotta give me a chance to make it right. Please." The man cocked his head to the left and then the right, looking like someone grappling with an important decision. And how should I do that? His eyes darted over to Rain, still floating against the wall. "What? You don't mean—" Eli started when he saw the man's sinister smile, who gestured to the dagger. "Shove that." He pointed to Rain. "Into her heart." "I can't." "Really? What do you mean you can't?" The man looked genuinely puzzled. "She's my girlfriend," Eli rasped. "Think of how many," he air quoted the next bit, "girlfriends you could have. There's got to be someone else I can kill for you." Eli shouted. The man only shook his head solemnly. I'm afraid it's either her or nothing. But make up your mind, I'm getting tired of this drivel. He walked over to the kitchen and cracked open a beer. After several minutes of agonizing, Eli picked up the dagger. His hands were shaking so bad he dropped it twice on the floor as he walked over to her. Suddenly, he stopped. Wait, what about Moonglow? He asked. The man looked up. What about Moonglow? Is she? She's locked up. Won't ever get out. She's going to take the fall for you and Jeb and Rain. It's only fair. Every group needs a martyr, I suppose. Just think. What will Rain say if I tell her you're responsible for her sister's prison sentence? The man brayed. Eli whirled around to face him. Me? He jabbed a finger in his own chest. How am I responsible for this? The man's eyes widened and he gave Eli an "Are you serious?" look. You're joking, right? When nothing showed on Eli's face, the man shook his head. Let me tell you something. I've overseen hell for millennia, so I've seen my fair share of the most despicable of creatures, but you're a cold one, Eli. Allowing me to rope your friends into this little game without their consent? Yes. Cold indeed. That's not my fault, you tricked me. Eli took a step closer, the dagger gyrating in his hand as his knuckles tightened into an ironclad death grip. What are you going to do with that? Stab me? The man looked amused. Don't tempt me. Ha! I already have. I've taken over your life, Eli. Consumed your weak little mind. Stop. I'll kill you. No, you won't. You'll turn around and kill your girlfriend, and you know why you will? Why? Because you always do what you're told. Deep down, you know you're no leader. Not a real man. No, deep down, you know you're a failure. Nothing you've ever done has made your life any better, and so here you stand, the epitome of selfishness, and try to shirk your responsibility onto me. I reject that. So go on. Make your choice. You always have. No! Eli screamed. The man sighed. Fine then. Suddenly the dagger was wrenched from Eli's hand. He reached out to try and grab it, but it was no use. It flew directly into the man's hand, who stashed it back in his suit jacket. He stepped past the weeping Eli and over to Rain. He placed his hand over her chest. Turning his head, he looked into Eli's soul, or what was left of it. This is for your own good, the man said, pressing his palm into the girl's chest. Her eyes sprung open, her mouth contorting into an undulating, open-mouthed wail. Her body began to thrash violently. Skin began to tear and rip as blood burst forth. Bones shattered and bent the wrong way, morphing and reshaping. Rain's screams weren't of this earth. Eli jammed his fingers into his ears to block them out, but it was like placing a wine cork in front of a raging firehouse. Stop it! She shouted, but the man's delighted glee was uninterrupted. His hands moved around his body like he was conducting an orchestra. And Rain was no longer human. Her body was so twisted and mangled that it was an unrecognizable twitching heap on the floor. This is immortality, the man said. And suddenly Rain's body reformed. Eli watched on in horror as the pile of flesh took on a new shape. A small brown body with a pair of jetting antennas. A roach, Eli. Cockroaches can survive anything after all. She'll live forever, scurrying about the earth. Long after the earth is gone, actually. Her mind will go insane long before, however. Never able to sleep, never shut her eyes, never eat again. And all because of you. Her mind is intact. She'll see and hear, but she has no mouth to scream. A sick, demented smile played across the devil's lips. Eli only wept louder. And as for you, prissy boy, you'll go on as normal. No immortality for you, I'm afraid, and I wouldn't have it any other way. After all, I can't wait to play with you in hell after you die. Your soul is my property, and I'm ready to foreclose. And then, with a wisp of black smoke, the devil was gone. Eli stumbled over to the lone cockroach on the floor. He held out his hand and it crawled into it. Eli threw his head back and screamed out his anger, his heartbreak, his helplessness, but most of all, his terror. And that's the end of the story. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you, Jarrett, for sending this one in. I really do appreciate it. That one was a wild ride. And I hope you did enjoy it too. And like I say often enough, I guess, without people sending in their stories or letting me read their stories, there would be no channel. So I'm eternally grateful. And thank you to my patrons for helping make this episode possible. If you would like to become a patron and support this channel even more, well, you can do so on Patreon. Well, obviously, there's links in the description of this episode that, hey, check it out if you want. And there's a Discord too if you'd like to. Come join us and hang out. If you fancy yourself a writer too, you can go to storiesaftermidnight.com, where there will be a link to send me your story if you'd like to have it read on the channel. So either way, I appreciate you for stopping by. Thank you for checking out this story, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.